In December 1949, in the Kremlin, teacher Mao, who had just won the revolution, went to Fangsu for the first time. This was also the first time the teacher went abroad. Stalin held teacher Mao's hand tightly, looked at it for a while and said, "You are very young, radiant, you are amazing." He turned around and introduced his colleagues to the teacher one by one. In the hall, greet each other and express best wishes to each other. Stalin said to teacher Mao, "Great, really great. You have made great contributions to the Chinese people, and you are a good son of the Chinese people. We wish you health." He also said, "You have achieved a great victory, congratulations on your progress." At this time, the atmosphere was very lively. Teacher Mao replied, "I am a person who has been hit and excluded for a long time, and I have nothing to say." Before the teacher finished speaking, Stalin immediately interjected, "Victors are not judged, and victors cannot be condemned. This is a general axiom." Stalin's words prevented teacher Mao from speaking out what was in his heart. The above scene is recorded in Beside the Giants of History, Memoirs of Zizek, Central Literature Publishing House, December 1991 edition, Chapter 14, Section 2, The First Meeting of Two Great Men. The author Zizek was the teacher's translator at that time. Who is teacher Mao? He is the leader of the Chinese people, a great Marxist, a great proletarian revolutionist, strategist, and theorist, the main founder and leader of the Communist Party of China, the Chinese People's Liberation Army and the People's Republic of China, and the great pioneer of the Sinicization of Marxism, the great patriot and national hero of modern times, the core of the first generation of the central leadership of the Communist Party of China, a generation of great men who led the Chinese people to completely change their own destiny and the appearance of the country. But such a great man who appears once every 2,000 years, why should he say, "I am a person who has been hit and excluded for a long time, and I have nothing to say"? The reason must be found in the history of the party. On September 3, 1963, when teacher Mao met with foreign guests, he said something like this: "There are advantages and disadvantages to having a husband. Don't want a husband. Read, write, and think by yourself." This is also a truth. In the past, we were taught to write by our husband. From the establishment of the party in 1921 to 1935, we just ate Mr. S. loss. The program was drafted by him, and the resolutions of the Central Plenary Session were also drafted by him, especially in 1931, which caused us a lot of losses. Since then, we have learned to think for ourselves. We know China, the Chinese people don't understand the situation in China. How can this work? The real understanding of independence started from the Zunyi meeting. This meeting criticized dogmatism. The dogmatists said that everything was right in the Soviet Union, which is different from China's actual situation. Combine. In this passage, our teacher Mao emphatically mentioned 1931, so what happened in 1931? On January 7, 1931, the fourth plenary session of the enlarged Sixth Central Committee of the Communist Party of China was held in Shanghai. With the support of MIP, the representative of the Communist International, Wang Ming jumped from being a member of the Central Committee to a member of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee. This meeting became the beginning of the new left-leaning adventurism represented by Wang Ming, which occupied a dominant position in the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. In April, the three-person regiment sent by Wang Ming arrived at the Central Revolutionary Base. In October, Wang Ming served as the head of the CCP delegation to the Communist International. The Provisional Central Government headed by Boga continued to implement Wang Ming's left dogmatism line. Before Wang Ming left Shanghai for the Soviet Union, in order to eliminate the resistance to the promotion of left, he sent telegrams to the Central Soviet area one after another, with the purpose of imposing his left dogmatism on the Central Soviet area and the Red Army. From November 1st to 5th of the same year, according to the instructions of the Provisional Central Government, the Central Delegation, the three-person group, hosted the first Soviet Party Congress in Yeping, Rujin, which was known as the Southern Jiangxi Conference in history. The meeting debated on military issues, base areas, and the line of the agrarian revolution. Instructor Mao, the acting secretary of the Central Bureau of the Soviet area of the Communist Party of China, insisted that the set of lines and policies learned from practice in the Central Revolutionary base areas were correct and in line with the actual conditions of the base areas. However, The three-person group criticized and accused the work of the Central Soviet area in various aspects in accordance with the spirit of the instructions of the Provisional Central Committee. The meeting criticized the three so-called mistakes of the teachers: first, narrow empiricism and very strong transactionalism within the party. The second is the rich peasant line. The third is extremely serious and consistent right opportunism. According to the instructions of the temporary central government controlled by Wang Ming, the meeting decided to revoke Teacher Mao's position as acting secretary of the Central Bureau of the Communist Party of China's Soviet area. On May 20, 1932, the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of China sent a long instruction telegram from Shanghai, directly targeting Teacher Mao and criticizing his military strategy. The telegram stated that the strategy adopted by Instructor Mao in the three counter-campaigns against encirclement and suppression was completely wrong. It was a purely defensive line and guerrillism. The telegram criticized our faculty by name. This was the most painful period for our teacher during the Revolutionary War. He even said later, "Our foreign house came, I was thrown into the latrine. As a bodhisattva, I was alive in the past, but not in the future. They soaked my wooden bodhisattva in a cesspit, and then took it out, making it very smelly. At that time, not only did no one come to the door, even a ghost not at the door. I have never eaten foreign bread, I have never been to the Soviet Union, and I have never been to other countries to study. Some people who have eaten foreign bread do not trust me, thinking that Marxism-Leninism cannot emerge from the valley. Since the autumn of 1932, I have no job. I collected books from Zhangzhou and other places, and found all the books about Marxism-Leninism. I read that book again, and sometimes read it alternately. I worked hard and read the book for 2 years. The on contradiction and on practice that I wrote later were formed during the 2 years of reading Marxist-Leninist works. The reason why Wang Ming's remote-controlled temporary central government generated power and held meetings one after another to criticize Teacher Mao's ideas was that, on the one hand, he wanted to use this to attack the teacher and weaken his influence. Based on a correct assessment of the revolutionary situation, Instructor Mao opposed the risky plan to attack the central city, and advocated extensive guerrilla warfare in areas where the Kuomintang reactionaries ruled weakly. The gains and losses of a place should focus on maintaining and developing the vital forces of the Red Army. Naturally, this set of flexible tactics could not be accepted by Wang Ming, Bogu, etc., and was repeatedly accused of being rightist, and was criticized. But the teacher was unmoved. He trusted his own judgment. Later, the failure of the 5th anti-encirclement campaign and the tragic loss on the banks of the Xiangjiang River caused serious differences between Wang Jiaxiang and Zhang Wenxian, Bogu, and Li De. The teacher was ill at the time, and happened to chat with Wang Jiaxiang, who was also lying on a stretcher because of the injury, and continued to do Zhang Wenxian's work, repeated many times, and finally won the understanding and support of Wang and Zhang. At this time, the radio connection between the Central Red Army and the Communist International was interrupted. For a period of time, Wang Ming was unable to remotely command the Central Committee. The instructor used his great reputation in military command to suggest a change in the direction of the march, which was adopted and served the Red Army in crisis. Save the breather. Before the Zunyi meeting, with the deteriorating military situation, the leaders of the Red Army became more dissatisfied and resentful towards Bogu and Li De. The teachers worked one by one, analyzed the pros and cons, and summarized the gains and losses, so that most people realized Wang Ming's left-leaning adventurism the wrong line, and then won the support of the majority. Finally, when the meeting voted, more than 20 people supported the teacher to return to the leadership position of the Red Army and lead the epic 25,000-mile-long march. After the outbreak of the anti-Japanese War, from August 22 to 25, 1937, the Political Bureau of the 6th Central Committee held an enlarged meeting, the Luoquan meeting, in Fengjia village, Luoquan, northern Shaanxi, to discuss and formulate the mobilization of the military and civilians across the country to carry out a national liberation war and implement a comprehensive and protracted war. The policy of the anti-Japanese war further defined the tasks and various policies during the anti-Japanese war. The Luoquan meeting was chaired by Zhang Wenxian, and 22 people attended, including Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, Bogu, Zhu De, Ren Bishi, and Pen Dehui. Instructor Mao made a report on military issues and the relationship between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party. He analyzed the new situation after the start of the anti-Japanese war and the protracted nature of the war, and pointed out that the central task of the Communist Party is to mobilize all forces to win the final victory of the anti-Japanese war, and the key lies in implementing the Communist Party's comprehensive anti-Japanese line and opposing the Kuomintang's one-sided anti-Japanese line. The leadership of the proletariat in the United Front, unrestrainedly launch independent mountain guerrilla warfare in the enemy's rear, cooperate with the frontal battlefield, open up battlefields behind the enemy, and establish anti-Japanese base areas behind the enemy, in the Kuomintang-ruled areas. Unrestrainedly launch anti-Japanese mass movements, reduce rent and interest as the basic policy and other tasks to solve the farmers' land problems during the anti-Japanese war. However, Stalin wanted to use the Kuomintang government's army to contain Japan, so as to prevent the Japanese army from attacking the far east of the Soviet Union and avoid fighting on two fronts. The principle of independence in the United Front proposed by Teacher Mao was what Stalin worried about. Stalin thought of Wang Ming and decided to send him back to China. After Wang Ming arrived in Yan'an, he presided over a meeting of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee from December 9 to 14, 1937, known as the December meeting in history. At the meeting, Wang Ming made a special report entitled How to Continue the Comprehensive War of Resistance and Win the War of Resistance. He talked until the afternoon of the next day, all of which were about the three strategic principles of protracted warfare, guerrilla warfare, and independence determined at the Luoquan Conference. Criticize and deny. He also publicly named and criticized Nai Rongzhen and others who actively opened up base areas behind enemy lines at the meeting, saying that their actions impeded the United Front. Wang Ming held the so-called sword of Shangfang by the Comintern in his hand, and most of the participants were stunned by him. Many people started self-criticism at the scene, reviewing that they had come to the opposite side of the United Front. According to the chronology of Zhang Wenxian, at this meeting only Mao Zedong made a speech that essentially listed Wang Ming's mistakes. After Wang Ming arrived in Wuhan, he took control of the Yangtze River Bureau of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. He was arrogant and arbitrary, and even put the Yangtze River Bureau above the Central Secretariat, trying to fight against the Central Committee. In February 1938, at the meeting of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China held in Yan'an, Wang Ming went so far as to echo the Kuomintang's clamor for only one army and unified military order, and to obey the unified leadership of the Kuomintang in the military and abandon the consistent policy of independent military building. Policy, which shocked the members of the Politburo who attended the meeting. From May 26 to June 3 of the same year, Teacher Mao gave a speech on protracted war at the Yan'an Anti-Japanese War Research Association. The teacher refuted the theory of national subjugation and theory of quick victory in society and within the party, pointed out that the war of resistance against Japan was a protracted war, and had to go through three stages: strategic retreat, strategic stalemate, and strategic counteroffensive, and raised guerrilla warfare to a strategic position. This is a programmatic document for the Chinese Communist Party to guide the war of resistance against Japan. In early July, the central government called the Yangtze Bureau to ask it to publish on protracted war as soon as possible in the Xinhua Daily published in Wuhan, but Wang Ming refused to publish it on the pretext that the article was too long. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of China called the Changjiang Bureau to publish it in separate issues, but Wang Ming still ignored it. Teacher Mao later said, "During that time, my instructions could not get out of the Yan'an cave." Wang Ming only followed the lead of the Communist International and Stalin, put the interests of the Soviet Union only, completely abandoned the independent work policy, and bowed to the Chiang Kai-shek regime. What he got in exchange was the Southern Anhui incident. The new Fourth Army suffered heavy losses, and Chiang Kai-shek passively resisted the war, and actively anti-communist wolf ambitions are also fully exposed. Finally, after the Yan'an rectification movement, the party's work and the revolutionary cause finally returned to the right track and got rid of the harm of Wang Ming's dogmatism. This was a great victory in 1949. The century-old party history of our party has fully proved the truth, that is, only by adhering to the independent spirit based on the actual national conditions can the cause of the party and the people succeed. Deviation from this spirit and guiding ideology will bring setbacks and failures. Soviet faction or Western faction, no matter extreme left or extreme right, the reason why they cannot lead the party and the people from one victory to another is because they deviate from the national conditions, independence, and independence. The interests of the nation have become the spokesperson of political groups outside the region. From the left-leaning adventurism in 1931 to the right-leaning capitulationism in 1937, two Wangmings emerged in just 6 years, one left Wangming and one right Wangming. Which one is the real Wangming? The more I read the history of the party, the more I am amazed at the difficulty of the teacher. There are powerful enemies outside and ghosts inside. He has gone through a lot of hardships for the independence of China and the liberation of the people. This kind and profound gaze looks towards the liberation and future of China. During the rectification movement in Yan'an, Teacher Mao said sharply, the key to Wangming's mistakes is that he thinks too much for others, the Soviet Union, and too little for himself, the Chinese Revolution. Things are constantly changing and developing. The Soviet Union is gone, and the US imperialism is still there. What about people with less? A recent CICC China Total Wealth Analysis report gives such a set of data. China's total wealth is 790 trillion. Among them, state-owned assets are 360 trillion yuan and private assets are 440 trillion yuan. Among the 440 trillion private assets, 1% of the rich class, about 4.6 million people, is 290 trillion, 63.04 million per capita. The middle class, about 99 million people, 110 trillion, 1.11 million per capita. The remaining 1.3 billion people, the total assets are 30 trillion yuan, and the per capita is only 22,000 yuan. Let's draw the data of CICC into a chart to intuitively understand the part of private assets. Obviously, this situation has surpassed the often heard 8 to 8 rule. If you add up the 2 on the head, it will be 7.38% of the population, 93% of the wealth, the richest 7% and 93% of the people. The gap between percent of ordinary people is not several times, but more than 80 times. Many Chinese people today have a take it for granted. Everyone knows that the 4 great inventions originated in China. It is a pity that in this world, apart from everyone knows China, this sentence is not so applicable in other countries and regions. This is like saying everyone knows that Taiwan belongs to China and everyone knows that Tibet is a part of China, which is very self-misleading. In fact, in Western countries, and even in many other countries where Western centrism dominates the education system and the discourse power of information circulation, many people do not know that the 4 great inventions originated from China. To give a typical example, there is a prestigious and authoritative scientific organization in the world today, called the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, which is the largest association of science and engineering associations in the world. It has an official journal, which is also one of the most authoritative academic journals in the world today, called Science. In January 2000, Science published a special issue as part of a series of events celebrating the new millennium of the Christian era. In this issue, Science magazine and the American Association for the Advancement of Science jointly published a chronology of millennium events in the history of science in the world, entitled Pathways of Discovery, which listed in detail there are 96 most important scientific achievements in recorded human history. As a result, China was not mentioned at all. For example, printing is on the list, but the inventor is not Chinese. Just like the standard narrative adopted in many Western-led textbooks and mass media propaganda, the judges of Science magazine and the American Association for the Advancement of Science attributed the invention of printing to the Germans, saying, it was invented by the Germans' ancient Thunberg invention. I recently read a thesis written by a PhD from a well-known Chinese university, which is repeating the popular science knowledge of American authorities. Under the dazzling aura of science, science popularization propaganda is carried out to fool the people. This implicit and sophisticated brainwashing technique has eroded every field of global education like cancer cells today. After nearly 2 centuries of Western centrism systematically reconstructed the history of human science and technology and civilization, completely erasing the traces of Chinese invention and innovation and the memory of national history from human civilization, this has never been completed in the Christian West for several centuries. The great project was finally completed by American scientific authorities in the way of science popularization. Just like printing, Europeans also invented gunpowder under the Western techniques of changing posts, changing concepts, and inverting black and white. The laurels of paper-making are often given to the West for more than a century. The ancient Egypt of the ancestor, As for China's series of brilliant achievements in mathematics and astronomy, these must be grafted onto Babylon, another ancestor in the West, innovative inventions far ahead of the world in a series of fields such as astronomical observation and calendar, chemistry, mechanical engineering technology, metal smelting, underground drilling, oil and gas well exploitation and fuel utilization, bridge construction, navigation, military technology, industrial and agricultural technology and models, and musical rhythm, as well as the countless common but indispensable inventions, innovations, and improvements in the basic necessities of modern human life. All of these have been wiped clean by the strokes of the scientific authorities. Among the major cultural systems in the world, the West may be the last one to use the number zero, but it has reached the pinnacle in the art of returning to zero all the achievements of others. Just imagine the crazy scenes that happened in the land of the free America in the 19th century to understand how insane and unbelievable this returning technique is. This American technique is destroying archaeological remains. Just as members of the Jesus Society in China in the 18th century destroyed Guo Xiaojing's astronomical observation instruments that were several centuries ahead of Europe, the core members of several authoritative academic institutions in the United States at that time actively participated in the destruction of China and other Asians who arrived before the Europeans' archaeological remains of the American continent because it does not fit their formative narrative of the history of human civilization. A nation that lacks a sense of history is convinced that it will invent a new history by obliterating history. After nearly 2 centuries of Western centrism, historical reconstruction, and monopoly of discourse power, the Western version of the history of science and technology and even the entire history of human civilization has firmly occupied the dominant position. Today, not only is the status of the 4 great inventions in jeopardy, but even in China, although the 4 great inventions are almost household names, one-sided emphasis on the 4 great inventions has unintentionally led to an unfortunate result. In the long history of thousands of years, China is a truly innovative country, and Waxia is undoubtedly the most creative nation. It has brought countless major inventions and creations to the world, emerging one after another, like stars. Although the 4 great inventions had an extremely significant impact on the course of world history, it does not mean that they are the most important inventions of China, and they are far from enough to demonstrate the creativity of the Chinese nation, the highly developed science and technology, and the fact that they have been far ahead of the world for a long time. The extent and breadth are not enough to fully reflect the great contribution of the Chinese nation to the progress of human civilization. It is no exaggeration to say that without the Chinese nation spreading civilization to the world through various means for thousands of years, there would be no human world today. Blindly emphasizing the 4 great inventions, the true light of innovation of the Chinese nation has been obscured, as if the 4 great inventions are the only and ancient memory of this nation, especially after the Western centrism historical myth instilled in the past 2 centuries. Under these conditions, a large number of native Chinese scholars disdain their own independent research, doctoral dissertations, and publications are only satisfied with parroting, repeating various historical myths and lies that have been distorted in black and white spread by the West. Except for the 4 great inventions in ancient times, don't the Chinese basically have any inventiveness? Did the Chinese invent gunpowder and only know how to use it for fireworks, waiting for Westerners to use it for firearms and dominate the world? The Chinese invented the compass but don't know how to use it for navigation, so they can only wait for Westerners to sail around the world to open up a new world. Has China's agriculture and industry been stagnant and lack of creativity for thousands of years? Is China a country with a long history of feudal closure and backwardness? The Industrial Revolution in the UK, the core technologies in the Agricultural Revolution in the Netherlands, and the Science and Technology Revolution are all evidence of the West's independent innovation tradition, rather than the original technologies and models invented by China in the previous centuries. Steal and embezzle? Are the Chinese really a nation that is not good at original inventions, without freedom, openness, and enterprising spirit? Are Chinese characters really hindering innovation and invention? Robert Temple listed China's 100 world firsts in China, a country of invention and discovery. In the foreword of the book The West Owes China, he observed, "One of the biggest unknown secrets in history is that the modern world we live in is the product of the combination of Chinese civilization and Western civilization. Most of the inventions and discoveries based on which the modern world is based may come from China. But the facts are unknown to the world, and Chinese people and Westerners are equally ignorant about this. After Western missionaries came to China in the 17th century, Chinese people were shocked by Western technology and committed amnesia for their own achievements. How did the modern Chinese suffer from collective amnesia? In fact, until the late 18th century, there were almost no historical myths such as the independent development and rise of the West in the whole world, nor could there be any such historical myths as the West was born with advanced technology and originality and the East was closed and backward. Chinese characters hinder innovation and other propaganda slogans of civilization warfare that are completely contrary to historical facts. Conceptual terms such as industrial revolution and scientific and technological revolution that have been blown into the sky today have not yet been invented. For several centuries before that, the West was eagerly acquiring a vast amount of advanced technology and knowledge from China, aiming at this country that Adam Smith considered far richer than any other place in Europe in the 18th century. The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, Book I, Chapter 11, Part 3, pg 221. Several jihad knights are hiding their strengths and biding their time, preparing to launch a just war against China when the time is right, to convert this godless nation. So, by whom and when did those historical myths be invented and spread on a large scale around the world? What is the purpose? What role does the monopoly of education and media discourse play in this? Subduing the enemy without fighting was originally the strategy of the ancient Chinese military genius strategists. However, in modern times, it has been successfully applied to the Chinese, and it has been invisible on multiple levels in modern China. Played a major role in the colonial process. There are several masters who are proficient in using this strategy. One is the Christian Church, and the other is the master of the stealing technique and reversing black and white techniques centered on the powers such as Britain, the United States, Germany, and France. One of the most successful examples of implementing this strategy is that starting from about the 19th century, the West carried out large-scale and systematic reconstruction of the history of human civilization, firmly controlled the discourse power of history, gradually infiltrated and controlled the discourse power of education and the media, and erased the historical memory, civilizational achievements, and national identity of China and other nations have erased the significant contributions and brilliant achievements of non-Western nations to human civilization. In order for the myth of Western civilization is superior to be deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, China, as a great country of innovation and invention and a well-deserved technological power in the history of mankind, the traces of brilliant civilization carried by the Chinese nation, together with her national historical memory and identity, must also be thoroughly dispelled. Erase.